The year is 1989. 6 individuals set off on a journey across the globe to destroy an ancient evil lurking in Cairo, Egypt. Dio. An immortal vampire who had stolen the body of Jonathan Joestar over a century ago sought to dominate humanity once more. Dio was empowered by a terrifying stand, the world, which granted him the ability to stop time, making him nearly invincible. To save Jotaro Kujo's mother from Dio's curse, Jotaro, Joseph Joestar, and their allies, Muhammad Avdol, Jean-Pierre Polnareff, Iggy, and Noriaki Kakyoin, traveled across the globe to find Dio and kill him. The journey was long and harrowing. Dangerous, stand-wielding assassins sent by Dio attacked them at every corner. Upon reaching Dio's mansion in Cairo, the group engaged in a fight with Dio's last line of defense while trying to reach him. It was during a fight with one of Dio's henchmen, Vanilla Ice, that Avdol and Iggy lost their lives. In the final confrontation, Kakyoin uncovered Dio's secret, his ability to stop time, but paid for it with his life. His revelation led to Dio's defeat at Jotaro's hands. After the fight, Joseph, Polnareff, Jotaro, Kakyoin's body, and Dio's remains were picked up by the Speedwagon Foundation. Holly's life was saved. Dio's reign of terror was put to an end. It was over. All he knew was darkness and visions. Strange, disjointed things emerging from the inky blackness. He saw a man with dark skin smiling at him and extending his hand towards him, and he could have sworn he saw a dog there, too. But before he could take the man's hand, he was thrust back down into the darkness, grabbed by hundreds of invisible hands he couldn't see while their whispers surrounded him. Then he started hearing things. He thought he heard crying, then the sound of medical equipment and personnel working feverishly to save someone's life. But the flatline wouldn't go away, ringing, piercing, tearing into his skull until his eardrums had ruptured. He screamed, but no sound came from his mouth. He was so thirsty. His tongue felt like sandpaper, his throat cracked and raw. He tried to clasp a cup of water between his hands, but the moment he brought it to his lips, it slipped through his fingers and shattered at his feet. Glass embedded in his skin, and though it hurt, no blood came. His sense of time was destroyed. He could have been trapped in these dreams for hundreds of years or just a minute. They kept coming, each one more horrific than the last. He prayed to whoever could hear him to let it end, to let him slip away and disappear if it meant he could be free. Then suddenly, it was quiet again. The other noises had blinked out in an instant. From the darkness, a man's face emerged. He was extremely beautiful, almost ethereal, as if he was from another plane of existence. His golden hair flowed over his alabaster skin, his orange eyes and 3 moles on his ear cutting through the darkness to reach him. He smiled, a wicked yet charming smile. Fangs glinted from the corners of his mouth.
Wake up, Kakyoin.
His voice matched his face, wicked, yet extremely charismatic. It was a voice you had to have an iron will to not immediately obey. It was soothing, yet made every hair on his body stand on end. He felt like he was going to vomit. The man reached out to touch him. When his fingers reached Kakyoin's neck, they were like ice. Then everything rushed back all at once. A violent pull like being dragged to the bottom of the ocean. Sensation flooded into his limbs, his body suddenly there, awake, alive. He regained control of his limbs. His eyes shot open and he gasped loudly. He tried to sit up, but then smacked his head on something. He yelled out in pain and clutched his forehead, still laying down. He opened his eyes again, searching frantically around to see where he was. It was pitch black and completely silent. He was worried it was another dream, but nothing happened for several seconds, confirming that this was the waking world. All he could hear was the sound of his ragged breathing. He tried to put his hand up, but it was stopped a few inches above his face. He felt around and realized he was in some kind of box. He tried moving his legs, but he could only move them a few inches to the side, as there was no room to move them up and down. Pushing on the surface above him, nothing happened, and he came to the paralyzing realization that he was trapped in this box. He started to breathe heavily. He was panicking. He couldn't escape. He started to sweat furiously. A pressure built in his chest as his hands scraped against wood. The thirst from his dream was real. He felt like he would die if he didn't get anything to drink. Suddenly, he heard something. He stopped to listen. It sounded like footsteps, yet they were muffled and far away. Straining his ears, he realized they were coming from above him. Was someone walking on top of him? Then the smell hit his nostrils. It tore down his throat and fully ensnared his senses. His panic and confusion melted away in an instant like mist at sunrise. He inhaled deeply. The scent was faint, but it felt like taking the first breath of air after being nearly drowned. Blood. He had to find the source. He started pushing on the lid of the box. He felt newfound strength surging through his fingertips at blinding speed. He pushed more and more, growling with the effort. He felt wood start to splinter between his fingers, mud pouring in from above. The scent became stronger as he pushed through, determined to get out. With a final push, debris and mud flew into the air and his face was drenched with a downpour of rain. He inhaled deeply, the scent stronger than ever before. He dug at the earth around him, pulling himself out of the hole he had created. Slowly, he dragged himself through what seemed like an endless slosh of mud and dirt. He emerged onto the wet grass, the rain falling in torrents around him. He panted, but not from effort. He felt exhilarated, like he could run 1,000 meters and not become tired. He sniffed again, and saw the source of the smell that had pulled him out of the ground. His head snapped toward its source. It was a man. He wore a raincoat and held a rusty shovel in his hands, which he clutched tightly. He was staring in bewilderment at Kakyoin, the scent of fear rolling off of him in waves, along with the scent of blood, which in his frenzy he noticed that it was strongest on his hand where he had cut himself with the shovel. They stared at each other for a moment. Then Kakyoin smiled and lunged. The man tried to run away, too slow. Kakyoin was on him in an instant. The man cried out in fear and swung the shovel sideways and hit Kakyoin square on the cheek. White-hot pain flared through his skull. He yelled out in surprise and fell sideways, but managed to catch himself before he hit the ground. Gingerly, he touched his cheek. It was pounding and swelling, but in a few seconds the pounding went away and his cheek went back to its normal size. He looked back up, furious, only to see the man running away from him, his outline becoming blurry in the thick, lashing rain. As if on instinct, he stretched his hand out, and Hierophant's tentacles flew, fast and steady. Several of them coiled around the man's leg and ankle, and he tripped. He screamed as Hierophant pulled him back. Once he was close, he turned and saw Kakyoin, his eyes full of tears and horror. Kakyoin relaxed Hierophant's grip, and then lunged again. He wrapped his arms around his neck and tore the man's throat open with his teeth. He stabbed his fingers into the man's flesh and started absorbing every drop of moisture in him, quenching Kakyoin's insatiable thirst. After a few seconds, the man stopped moving, and then his breathing and heart went still. Kakyoin hardly noticed, only worried about feeding. Once the man was empty, Kakyoin sat up, feeling very satisfied. Now that his frenzy had passed, his mind began to become clear. He looked at his surroundings. Then he looked down. A corpse lay at his feet. A shriveled husk, drained of everything that had once made it human. Kakyoin's breath caught in his throat. He gave a startled yell and kicked the corpse away reflexively. The body flew through the air and landed in the trees far away. He blinked in surprise. How had he done that? To perform that kind of trick, you had to be some kind of athlete or superhuman. His chest heaved, his mind reeled. What had he just done? His heart began to pound rapidly. He tried to think. Where was he? Who was that man? Why was he here in the first place?
Who am I?
For a terrifying few seconds, he couldn't think of the answer, but it came to him after a few more agonized moments of thinking.
Noriaki. That's right. I'm Noriaki Kakyoin. My friends called me Kakyoin. I had friends?
He began to breathe harder, panicking. Why couldn't he remember? Why was everything a blur? He put his hands to his head, trying desperately to remember the answers.
Think back. Start working your way backwards.
He squeezed his eyes shut tight, trying to remember the last thing he did. All he remembered was bursting out of the ground and those nightmarish visions he saw when he was asleep. Pain shot through his eye sockets as he remembered those terrifying visions. Even recalling them made a cold sweat trickle down his spine in the rain. Then he saw a face. He remembered it was the one that had pulled him out of those dreams and into reality. The beautiful, ethereal man with orange eyes and 3 moles on his ear. Suddenly, the name of that man became quite clear to him, as if the memory of his charisma and wicked nature had been etched into his very soul. Dio. He gasped as the name brought tons of memories rushing all at once. Meeting Dio in Cairo when he had been on vacation with his family. Having a flesh bud forcefully implanted into his brain. How ashamed he felt that he was relieved when Dio had promised to spare his life and allow Kakyoin the chance to serve him. And then, Dio had given him a mission. A very simple one. Kill Jotaro Kujo and his allies, including Joseph Joestar and Muhammad Abdal.
Jotaro.
Yes, he remembered now. It was very clear. These memories were less painful. They were happy ones. He clung to them, trying to hold on to it as long as he could. Jotaro had freed him from Dio's control. He had traveled the world with Jotaro and their other friends to track down Dio and kill him. It was strange. Those days were terrifying, seemingly never-ending. They had been attacked by countless stand users sent by Dio. So why were these memories happy? They had found Dio, fled from his mansion, split up to attack from both sides. He'd gone with Joseph, laid a trap with Hierophant's web. Dio was caught in it. Then, pain exploded in his stomach. He gasped and bent over, clutching his abdomen with his arms. But it was no good.
Oh, God.
He doubled over and vomited. Bile landed on the soaked ground. He coughed, trying to get a handle on himself. The sensation of the wound Dio had inflicted on him had crashed down on him in an instant. The mere memory of that event sent goosebumps erupting on his flesh and made the pain feel fresh. He could still feel the gaping hole, the shock as the cold water from the tower trickled over his back, and the paralyzing feeling that had spread through his body. He felt his stomach, finding it completely normal though. He began to breathe harder. The terror of his final moments returned to him. He had figured out Dio's ability. He had to tell Mr. Joestar. He fired his last emerald splash at the clock tower, stopping its hands. It was his desperate, last-ditch effort to tell Mr. Joestar that Dio could stop time. Then, he was dead. His consciousness floating away like going down a river into a dark tunnel, the light behind him receding. The memories stopped, like a VHS tape coming to the end of a roll of film. He thought harder, willing them to continue, but nothing came.
I died. And then, where am I now?
He put his hand to his mouth, trying to ignore the bits of flesh from the man's throat around his lips, when his finger brushed against his tooth, and his blood ran cold. No, that couldn't be. He gingerly touched his canine tooth with his finger. It was pointed, like a wolf's tooth. He slowly felt his other teeth. All his canines were longer and sharper, like they had all grown out and been filed to a point. His other teeth weren't as sharp, but they still felt a bit more pointed than normal. He started panicking even more. His teeth, his wound, that man with the shovel, this place. He finally looked up and around. Graves dotted the earth around him, protruding from the ground like teeth. His stomach dropped. If this was a graveyard, then that hole he had come out of was... He swiftly turned around, looking where he had come from. His eyes widened and filled with tears.
No. No. No!
He clasped his mouth again, this time holding back sobs. The gravestone in front of him was slick with rain, but the black character stood out clearly to him through the haze, cutting him to his core. Kakyoin Noriaki, 1972 to 1989. Beloved son and friend. He fell to the ground, clasping his head in his hands. Even with his eyes shut, the black characters on the gravestone seemed to be burned into his brain, refusing to leave his mind's eye as the words were etched there permanently. Why was this happening? Was this the afterlife? Was this some form of divine punishment? To wake up in this hellish reality where he barely remembered who he was, and his body had changed in ways he couldn't explain? But the rain on his back, the damp scent of mud in his nostrils, this didn't feel like an afterlife. He clutched the grass with one of his hands, as if to anchor himself further. No, this was reality. He was sure of it.
Then, This is reality. What on earth is happening to me?
He stayed curled on the ground with his head in his hands for a long time, his mind racing to try and remember the truth. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remember anything from when he died to now. He was so lost in thought he didn't even notice when it stopped raining. He also didn't notice the sun starting to rise on the horizon. Slowly, but surely, the sun's light started to creep across the ground, silently. The sunlight snuck up behind him. It touched his toe. A stabbing pain shot through his foot from where the light touched him. He cried out and pulled his foot towards him. The pain raced up his leg, stabbing him to the core. He watched in horror as his toe turned to dust and crumbled where the sunlight had touched it. He scooted away, further retreating to the shadows.
What? How?
That was all he had time to think before excruciating pain overtook his mind. He screamed, clutching his leg closer to him. He felt his senses slipping away, the instinct to survive starting to kick in. He looked up to see what had attacked him. There was no one here except for him. The only thing that had changed was the sunlight beautifully illuminating the world, the rain clouds parting to reveal the dawn sky.
The sunlight.
He reached out with his left hand, trying to touch the rays of light approaching him. His finger broke apart and disintegrated before his eyes as it touched the light. The same white-hot agony spread up through his hand to his arm. He yelled out again and pulled his hand back towards him. He stared at his ruined finger. More pieces were crumbling as it spun up his hand. His heart pounded in terror. He had to get away. If the sun reached him before he found shelter, he'd be nothing but dust on the wind. He frantically searched around for an escape. He couldn't go back into the ground. His coffin was partially destroyed, and the hole he had emerged from was covered by the approaching sunlight.
There!
A patch of forest a bit far off where he had kicked the man's body. There had to be protection from sunlight under the trees, but he had to be quick. The light was rapidly encroaching the land. He stood up, trying to ignore the burning pain in his foot, and ran. He hobbled on his good leg, trying to cover as much ground as he could before it was too late. He clutched his ruined left hand with his other one, trying to protect it. His head became dizzy from pain. He felt his senses slipping away again, replaced by the feral ferocity that had driven him to kill the old man. No, he had to hold on. Just wait until he could get to shelter. The sunlight, so warm and beautiful, had caught up to his hobble. It kissed his right elbow. It was delayed since his elbow was covered in the long sleeves of his burial shirt, but his elbow turned to dust inside the shirt, just the same as the other parts of him that had touched the light. He yelled and tripped over a gravestone embedded in the ground. Tears began to blur the corners of his vision. The pain was like a hot poker had jabbed him in the elbow and was ramming its heat through his arm, trying to consume him from the inside out. It, combined with the pain in his hand and foot, gave him the worst agony he had ever felt in his whole life. He writhed on the ground, heaving heavy breaths to try and stay conscious. But the sun was unrelenting. In Kakyoin's haze of terror, he glanced up at the sun coming over the horizon. It continued to creep over the ground towards him as if it was anxious to kill him. He wanted to pass out from pain, but he knew that if he did, the light would cover him and completely destroy him. In desperation, he tried to claw his way over the ground towards the trees, but it was still no good. His arms were ruined now that they had both been touched by sunlight. Trying to use them to pull himself along the ground was agonizing and far too slow. The sunlight kept creeping closer.
Hierophant.
In his desperation, he summoned Hierophant Green. His stand could uncoil its body. He'd used that ability to his advantage when fighting Dio. If he could use those coils in the same way now, he might have a chance. Hierophant wrapped a coil around the nearest tree, nearly 10 meters away. Hierophant had quite a long range of nearly 100 meters thanks to its ability to uncoil itself, making it useful for reconnaissance. It had another coil wrap around Kakyoin's chest. Using the tree as an anchor, his stand pulled him across the ground towards the tree. Hierophant vanished once he made it to the shadows of the trees, and Kakyoin gratefully hugged the tree trunk for support. He was still in intense pain, and he knew that he wasn't safe yet. Once the sun was overhead, the leaf-dappled light coming through the treetops onto the forest floor would be just as deadly.
Have to find better cover.
He used Hierophant to keep dragging himself across the forest floor. The woods here were dense, but the patch was small. He needed... There! There was a rocky overhang above a small ravine. Without even thinking, he dragged himself towards it and huddled against the ravine wall, letting the rock completely cover him. The cool shadow from the rock enveloped him, and he sighed in relief. He was safe. His eyelids felt heavy, still wanting to pass out from the pain he was in, but he was frankly terrified of falling asleep again. Those visions he had seen, they were too nightmarish to return to. He looked at his left hand. He saw that his fingers were still crumbled and gone, yet there was something different this time. The base of his index and middle finger had grown back. Grown back? He stared at his hand in fascination. As he watched closely, his fingers were reassembling themselves, knitting themselves together little by little from the leftover dust. He checked his elbow and foot. They were doing the same thing. His heart pounded. His throat burned like he'd been parched for days. Something was very wrong with him. No human could regenerate like this. No human burned in sunlight or had fangs sharp enough to tear through flesh. And no human could kick a body several meters into the trees like he had done to that old man's corpse.
Does this mean I'm not a human anymore?
Before he could go down that terrifying rabbit hole of thoughts, he felt a sharp stab of pain from his hand. He winced and pulled it against his chest to protect it. Despite his body regenerating, the pain was still intense. He brushed his good hand against the wall and felt a tree root. Without thinking, he stabbed his fingers into it and began absorbing the moisture from the tree. He only noticed when he felt the root begin to wither beneath him. He gasped and drew his hand back. The root had 4 distinctive holes where he had stabbed his fingers like puncture wounds. Had he made those? His pain receded. He held up his left hand and noticed the fingers had grown back nearly all the way. He looked back to the tree. Whatever he had done had healed him. He put his fingers back into the holes. He allowed more of the tree's moisture to enter his body. Soon, the flow stopped. The tree was completely withered and dead. He looked at his hand. It was completely back to normal, as if it had never been burnt at all. Same with his elbow and foot. The fabric of his shirt had been singed away, revealing the soft, fresh skin of his new elbow underneath. He flexed his fingers, elbow and toes. They were all healed. There was no pain at all. The burning in his throat receded.
I took the tree's moisture?
And he'd done the same to the old man. His breathing quickened as he was finally able to devote some of his headspace to that man he'd seen. That man he'd killed. He killed a man. In an incredibly savage way. He swallowed his bile, not wanting to vomit again. That man. He didn't even know his name. He'd had a shovel, so he was either some kind of gravekeeper or robber. But still, Kakyoin had never killed an innocent person. The only time he'd come close was when he had almost killed that school nurse when attacking Jotaro. But that was different. He'd been under Dio's control then. He hadn't been himself. He only used his stand to fend off attackers, dealing a killing blow if necessary to protect himself or his friends. Shame and sorrow settled over him like a heavy blanket. He curled into a fetal position on the ground, hugging his knees to his chest. He could feel heat rising to his eyes.
You need to be strong. He was just an old man. You couldn't have escaped the coffin if he hadn't cut himself.
He closed his eyes shut tight. How could he think such thoughts? A long time passed. He laid on the ground, curled up for most of it. He could hear the birds singing now. The wind rocked the trees. He couldn't see much, though. The rocky overhang blocked his vision of the morning. He made sure to stay in the shadow as it moved. With not much else to do, Kakyoin could only lay there and think. The first thing he wanted to know was where he even was. He knew this was a graveyard, of course, but where in the world was he? There wasn't much he could do to discover the answer to that, unfortunately. It's not like he had a map, and he couldn't move from this spot or else he'd die. He'd have to wait on that. The next thing he wanted to know was the date. He knew their fight with Dio had taken place in early 1989, but that didn't tell him much about what day or even year it was now. He began to worry. What if it was far past 1989, and he had woken up in a new year or even a new century? Once again, he couldn't learn much from his spot in the forest that he was stuck in. The last thing he wanted to know was what had happened to his friends. His final act had been firing his stand's emerald splash at the nearby clock tower. Destroying the hands had been his way of telling Mr. Joestar that Dio could stop time. Had he figured it out? Had he been able to use that to defeat Dio? Had he been able to tell Jotaro? Polnareff? Were any of them even still alive? Goosebumps erupted on his flesh at that thought. He knew Avdol and Iggy were dead, killed by Dio's henchmen while he, Jotaro, and Mr. Joestar had been separated from the rest of the group. But what if they were all dead? What if his message had been in vain? If Mr. Joestar hadn't figured it out or passed on the message, had his death been for nothing? Was Dio still lurking somewhere, laughing in the shadows at the vain attempt they'd made on his life? Still plotting to overthrow humanity? Out of everything that had happened today, that thought was what terrified him the most.
No. It couldn't have all been for nothing, right? They had to have survived at least, even if they didn't kill him.
But Dio wasn't the kind of person who would just let his victims run free. He would have hunted them down to extinction as punishment for trying to kill him. Either he was dead, or his friends were. There was no other alternative. He clenched his fist. He had to know, and the fact that he couldn't move from this spot infuriated him beyond description. He wanted to charge out there and find anyone who could tell him what had happened. The sun couldn't stay up forever. Sooner or later it would be nightfall, and he should be free to move around then. And once that happened, he would go out into the world and find out the truth. Only once he was restricted from moving did Kakyoin realize how painfully slow the time could go. The sun climbed higher and higher in the sky, and all he could do was watch in silence from the shadow of the ravine. He saw a rabbit hop by, twitching its nose and whiskers, ready to detect predators. It nosed around in the grass for a while, digging here and there. He stayed completely still, watching intently. Kakyoin felt jealousy arise in his chest. This animal could move freely through the forest and enjoy the warmth of the sun, while he, the superior species, was forced to hide in the cleft of a rock to survive.
Stupid rabbit,
he thought angrily. He grabbed one of the pebbles at his feet and tossed it as hard as he could at the animal. The pebble hit the rabbit square on the flank. It ran off in a panic. He sighed. Great, now he chased away his only form of entertainment. He slumped his head on his knees. More time passed. The sun was finally beginning to descend, judging by the slight fading of the sky. It was still far too slow for his liking. He wanted to sleep, but fear of dreams kept him awake. Then he had an idea.
I wonder, can Hierophant survive the sunlight?
His stand was a physical manifestation of his soul. Any damage done to his stand would reflect on him, the user, and vice versa. If he sent Hierophant out into the sun, he could be destroyed, and he would die as well. But there was a chance that Hierophant could survive, and work in his stead in the sunlight. Then he might be able to act more quickly than he would just waiting for nightfall.
I'll try it. Slowly.
Hierophant came forth. He took a deep breath, bracing himself, and slithered the tip of a coil into the light. It burned. He gasped in pain. On his body, a patch of skin on his arm became warm and developed a painful, red rash-like pattern. It didn't disintegrate, though. He held the coil there a moment longer, waiting to see if anything else would happen. After a few seconds, the patch on his arm began to recede to a less painful pink, his new regenerative powers kicking in to counteract the injury. After a moment, it didn't hurt as much, though it was still tender. Excitement pounded in his chest. If this was all that would happen, he could easily brave the sunlight with Hierophant. He sent his stand out into the light fully. Every inch of him burned like being dunked in lava. He screamed from the pain as the rash spread over every part of him, but soon it receded, sinking to a tolerable itching level. He panted. This was working, but it took a lot of energy. He could feel his strength being sapped slowly. Whatever he was going to do with Hierophant, he had to do it quickly. He closed his eyes, letting his senses slip fully into Hierophant's. Not every stand user was capable of remotely piloting their stand, seeing and feeling everything as if they themselves were the stand, but he was an exception. With Hierophant's long range, seeing everything through his eyes was practically a necessity. He remembered that Jotaro could also do this, being able to see through Star Platinum's eyes if he chose to.
Jotaro.
The thought of his best friend sent a pang of sadness through him. He wished he knew where he was.
Focus,
he told himself. He didn't have much time. Once he was piloting his stand, he sent Hierophant into the sky. The best way to find out where he was to get a good vantage point, see if he could find any recognizable landmarks. He could figure out what to do from there. He stopped about 40 meters above the ground. He looked at the landscape around him. The graveyard he was in spread out in a neat square, then gave way to a suburban community that surrounded it. In the center of the town, it was more dense, with stores, schools, and restaurants bringing in a denser populace. Farmland surrounded the town. Beyond all of that was the mountains, and then to the east, the sea. His eyes widened. No, was this? He brought himself lower to the ground, being able to make out the specific buildings a little more closely. Yes, it was. He could see the Kamayu department store, and a ways down from that was his old high school, Budogaoka. This was his hometown, Morio, Japan. He breathed a sigh of relief. He wasn't in enemy territory after all. He guessed it made sense. If they were going to bury him, it would be where his parents lived.
My parents.
He hadn't seen his parents in so long. Not ever since that vacation they'd taken to Egypt and all of this had started. In his own body, he felt his eyes stinging. He wanted so badly to go to them, but what if he hurt them? How would they react to seeing their son, who they had just recently buried? Then he remembered. Hierophant was invisible to them, since they weren't stand users. He hadn't seen them in so long. He could just go see if they were all right. He piloted Hierophant towards his house. He soared over the familiar streets and homes, all of it bringing a rush of sad nostalgia to his senses. When he'd last been here, everything was different. He was alone in the world, with no one but his parents as friends. With Hierophant invisible to everyone he knew, he could never have real friends. No one could truly understand him, so he'd secluded himself. Then he'd met Jotaro. They'd gone on a life-changing journey, a journey that ended in his death. And now, he stopped. This was his neighborhood. His house was just down the street. He slowly drifted towards it, almost letting the breeze carry him. He was here. His home was right in front of him. He alighted Hierophant's feet on the grass. He stood and stared. It was the same as he'd left it. The neatly trimmed grass, the chimes on the porch echoing in the wind. A chasm opened in his heart. He was home, yet he never felt more like a stranger. He stepped up to the door. The same red welcome mat greeted him under his feet. He phased Hierophant through the front door. Now that he was inside, the pain from his skin had gone away, but his attention was directed away from that as he stepped into the house. His entryway. Family photos hung on the wall. Shoes lay abandoned at the door. The familiar scent of home hit his nostrils. There was another scent he didn't recognize, though. Was someone burning incense? He walked quietly down the hallway. His heart pounded in anticipation. He knew he was invisible, but he still didn't want to scare anyone by moving anything or causing a disturbance.
I just want to make sure they're safe.
He stopped. He was in the living room. A quaint little sitting room with a couple matching couches and more family photos on the wall. And sitting on the biggest couch was his mother. He froze, hardly daring to breathe. He kept his distance. But of course, she could neither see nor hear Hierophant. She made no signs she'd heard anything. She was bent over something on her lap, working on it intently.
Mom.
He wanted to go to her, to bury himself in her embrace while she stroked his hair, telling him everything was going to be all right, like she did when he was little. But he couldn't. She had never been able to see Hierophant. That wouldn't change now. She'd just be confused if he tried to approach or touch her. His throat tightened. Breathing became difficult.
Are you almost done, dear?
His father's voice shocked him from behind. He turned and saw his dad approaching from the doorway he had just entered through.
Dad.
He reached Hierophant's arms towards him, but his father neither felt nor saw it. He walked straight through Hierophant, phasing through him unknowingly. Hierophant's hands closed on empty air.
Almost. Just a few more.
She turned to look at his dad, giving him his first good look at her face. She seemed older than before, looking more tired and frail. But she still smiled, and was just as beautiful as she had ever been.
How was work?
She asked him. They started talking. The conversation was mundane. Work was fine, we're out of rice, we'll have to head to the store soon. Oh, and this neighbor was hosting a party soon, they'd have to bring something for that. It was just an empty conversation that would be forgotten in a week. Completely pointless. And yet he never wanted to join in more.
It's done!
She stood up, holding her work close to her body. She made her way into the hall.
We can finally put it up on the wall.
His dad followed her. Hierophant slowly made his way in that direction as well, curious to see what they were doing. They went down the hall that led to his and his parents' bedroom. They stopped in the middle and his mother started hanging something up on the wall. She finished right as Hierophant drifted up behind her. He looked at the wall and gasped at what he saw. There was a table, which held the burning incense he had smelled before. On the wall above it was his picture, hung in a portrait. He He recognized it as his yearbook photo, taken the prior year. There were a couple other pictures of him when he was younger. His mother had hung a cross-stitch on the wall next to one of the photos. It had his name and lifespan stitched in, with a design of a couple flowers next to it. His mother had never stitched anything before. She must have learned just to make this piece, in remembrance of him, her son. Her son who was never coming home.
It's beautiful, darling,
His father was saying.
Thank you.
His mother's voice broke, her eyes tearing up.
No, please don't cry.
He reached his arms out, barely stopping himself from wrapping her in a tight embrace. He was right here. She didn't need to cry or mourn anymore. Her son was alive. She could take those pictures down and put out the incense. But she could never know. Her son was a dangerous, bloodthirsty monster now. He could barely control himself around other people. If he went to them, he might hurt them by accident. A crime he could never forgive himself for. That would break her heart far more than him just being dead. So, a silent spectator was all he could be.
honey.
His father put his arm around her. They stood, staring at the shrine in silence. Kakyoin's father wasn't an emotional man, so it startled him to see his father's eyes becoming teary as well.
No. No, no!
Far away in his own body, his tears finally started to flow, leaking out of his eyes, spilling down his cheeks. He ripped at the dirt, furious at his inability to do anything.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to worry you so much. Please stop crying.
They couldn't hear him. How could he have been so selfish? He went off to Egypt with Jotaro without even so much as calling them or sending them a letter to know that he was all right. For all they knew, he had simply disappeared, and then received a phone call from a complete stranger 50 days later telling them the news that no parent ever wanted to hear. That their only son was dead and was never coming home. He thought he had been protecting them. He didn't want to worry them even more with what he was doing, going on an extremely dangerous mission to the other side of the world. All the good it had done them. His mother was sobbing now, her hands covering her face.
It was all my fault. I should've...
No. It wasn't your fault. We couldn't have known he'd run off.
But he was acting so strange ever since we came home from Egypt. We should never have gone. If we didn't, he'd still be here.
Noriaki was always a little strange.
His father tried to console her.
I just thought he was going through something he didn't want to talk about. I didn't think he'd run away.
After they'd come home from Egypt, he'd been under the flesh bud's mind control. Those days were a blur to him, his mind only consumed with the insatiable desire to do Dio's bidding. He couldn't think too much about what his parents thought was going on. All he had cared about was carrying out his mission to kill Jotaro.
Please, it's not your fault.
His dad was saying to her.
It's not your fault.
She kept crying, and his father soon joined in. Hierophant watched on silently. His body felt numb as he watched the sad scene in front of him. He wanted to do something. Anything to stop their grief. He knew it was a mistake, but he couldn't stop himself. Hierophant reached out again. This time he wrapped them both in a tight embrace. For a moment, he was enveloped in their warmth, their scent. Just for a moment, the world felt normal again. He almost forgot the bizarreness of the situation. They were a family again.
I'm here. Mom and Dad. You don't have to be sad anymore. We could just go back to how we always were.
But the dream couldn't last. His mom gasped loudly. She started struggling against the invisible embrace.
What the? Do you feel that?
She said, startled. He let go, taking a step back toward the wall. His mom and dad started looking around frantically, trying to see what had touched them.
What was that?
His dad asked, confused.
I don't know. It felt like something was grabbing me just now.
I felt it too.
They kept looking around. His mom's gaze landed right on where Hierophant was standing. He held his breath.
Guess it was nothing. I must have imagined it.
Guess so.
His dad said, pulling her towards the kitchen.
Come on, let's start dinner.
Yes, of course.
They left the hall to continue on with their mundane lives. Their lives without him. He stood in the hall for a moment, alone. Then he piloted Hierophant out into the entryway, faced to the front door, took off into the sky. The burning pain from the sun on his stand flared up sharply again. He let it wash over him. It was agonizing, but he held his tongue until his regenerative powers caught up and started healing him. It died down. He had Hierophant fly low over the houses. He brought him closer and closer as fast as he could, almost like he was reeling in a fishing line. He caught a brief glimpse of a TV news station as he flew over the center of town. The date was displayed on one of the headlines. It was February 12, 1989, only a couple weeks since their fight with Dio. He kept going until Hierophant reached the familiar edge of the cemetery. His stand came to the edge of the trees, through the woods, until he reached the rocky overhang where his user was hiding. He settled into Kakyoin's flesh like a second soul entering his body. He vanished as he was dismissed. Kakyoin opened his eyes. There were tears flowing freely from his bloodshot sockets now. He hugged his knees to his chest again and let out the loudest yell he possibly could. It was a scream made of all the emotions he had been unable to express at his parents' house. His sorrow, his anger, his fear, his longing for home.
Mom! Dad! I'm so sorry!
Sobs racked his body as he whimpered to no one who could hear him.
I'm so sorry. I should have never.
He trailed off. There were too many ways to end that sentence. He cried and cried and cried. He should never have gone to their house. He at least knew they were safe, but that didn't help the pain he felt now. He couldn't deny it anymore. He knew what he was. He just didn't want to accept it, but what he had seen at their home only reinforced it. That he was a monster. He wasn't their son anymore. He wasn't even human anymore. If he was, he would still be dead in the ground. The old man, his regenerative powers, the sunlight, his lust for human blood. He was a vampire. A soulless, disgusting vampire. Like Dio. He buried his face in his knees and sobbed harder than ever.